This is the Apothecary Diaries, Book 1, by Natsu Hyuga, and illustrator Toko Shino. Chapter 1, Maomao. What I wouldn't give for some good street stall meat skewers. Maomao looked up at the overcast sky and sighed. She lived in a world that was at once a place of unparalleled sparkling beauty and a noxious, foul, suffocating cage. 3 months already. Hope my old man's eating properly. It seemed just the other day she had gone into the woods to gather herbs, and there had met 3 kidnappers. Let us call them villagers 1, 2, and 3. They were after women for the royal palace, and, in a word, they offered the world's most forceful and unpleasant marriage proposal. Now, it wasn't that she wouldn't be paid, and with a couple years' work, there was that glimmer of hope that she might even be able to come back to her hometown. There were worse ways to earn a living if one went to the royal city of one's own accord, but Maomao, who had been making her way just fine as an apothecary, thank you very much, saw it solely as so much trouble. What did the kidnappers do with the nubile young women they captured? Sometimes they sold the girls to the eunuchs, putting the proceeds toward a night of drinking for themselves. Sometimes the young ladies were offered in lieu of someone's own daughter. To Maomao, it was a moot question, for now she found herself caught up in their schemes, regardless of the reason. Else she would never in her life have wished to have anything to do with the Hyogong, the rear palace, the residence of the imperial women. The place was so thick with the odors of makeup and perfume as to turn the stomach, and even more full of the thin, forced smiles of the court ladies in their beautiful dresses. In her time as an apothecary, Maomao had come to believe there was no toxin so terrifying as a woman's smile. That one rule held true whether in the halls of the most ornate palace or the squalid chambers of the cheapest pleasure house. Maomao hefted the laundry basket at her feet and headed into a nearby building. Unlike the dazzling front facade, the dreary central courtyard housed flagged stone-paved washing areas where the court's servants, people who were neither quite man nor quite woman, did laundry by the armload. Men, in principle, were not allowed in the rear palace. The only men who could enter were either members and blood relations of that most noble family in the country, or former men who had lost a very important part of themselves. Naturally, all the men Maomao was looking at right now were the latter. It was twisted, she thought, but admittedly a logical thing to do. She set down her basket and spotted another one sitting in the next building over. Not dirty clothes, but clean laundry that had dried in the sun. She glanced at the wooden tag dangling from the handle. It bore an illustration of a leaf along with a number. Not all of the palace women were literate. It wasn't that surprising. Some of them had been brought here by force, after all, and though the rudiments of etiquette were beaten into them before they arrived, letters were not. It would probably be lucky, Maomao reflected, if half the girls that got snatched from the countryside turned out to know how to read. It was, one might say, a hazard of the rear palace growing too populous. Quality was being sacrificed for quantity. Although it in no way equaled the flower garden of the former emperor, the consorts and ladies-in-waiting together numbered 2,000 people, while with the eunuchs that number came to 3,000, a vast place indeed. Maomao was a serving girl, a post so lowly she didn't even have an official rank. What more could she expect as a girl who had no one to back her at court, who had arrived by way of kidnappers to fill out the palace staff? If she had perhaps possessed a body as shapely as a peony, or skin as pale as the full moon, she might at least have aspired to the status of one of the lower concubines. But Maomao possessed only ruddy, freckled skin, and limbs with all the elegance of withered branches. I need to just get this job done. Maomao picked up the basket with its tag depicting a plum flower and the number 17, and trundled off as quickly as she could manage. She wanted to get back to her room before the frowning sky began to weep. The owner of the laundry in the basket was one of the low-ranked consorts. Her room was rather more lavish than those accorded to the other low consorts. In fact, it was downright ostentatious. The occupant, Maomao surmised, must be the daughter of some affluent noble family. When a woman was assigned a palace rank, she was also permitted her own ladies-in-waiting. A minor consort, however, could have 2 ladies at most, which was why Maomao, a serving girl with no mistress of her own on which to attend, was carting around the woman's laundry like this. A low consort was permitted personal rooms in the rear palace precincts, but they were inevitably on the fringes of the grounds, where the imperial eye was unlikely ever to fall upon her. If she should, nonetheless, be graced with a night with His Majesty, she would be granted new rooms, while a second such night meant she had truly found a place in the world. As for those who ultimately never excited the emperor's interest, after a certain age a consort, assuming her family didn't wield particular influence, could expect to see herself demoted, or even granted as a wife to some member of the bureaucracy. Whether that was a blessing or a curse depended on whom she was granted to, but the fate the women feared most was being bestowed upon one of the eunuchs. Maomao knocked discreetly on the door. A lady-in-waiting opened it and snapped, "Just leave it there." Within, a consort redolent of the sweetest perfume was sipping some alcohol from a cup. She must have been much admired for her beauty in those halcyon days before she had arrived at the palace. But when she got here, she discovered she had known as much about the outside world as a frog who had spent its life in a well. Crowded out by the array of dazzling flowers in this garden, she had lost her will to continue fighting for a place here, and of late had ceased to come out of her room at all. "You know no one is going to come visit you in your own room, right?" Maomao traded the basket in her arms for the one sitting outside the door and went back to the laundry area. There was so much work to do still. She may not have come to the palace of her own volition, but they were at least paying her, and she intended to earn her keep. Maomao, the apothecary, was diligent-minded, if nothing else. If she kept her head down and did her job, she could hope to leave this place some day, if never, she assumed, to gain royal notice. Sadly, Maomao's thinking was, let us say, naive. She didn't know what was going to happen. No one does. That's the nature of life. Maomao was a relatively objective thinker for a girl of 17, but she had a few qualities that continually dogged her. For one, curiosity, and for another, a hunger for knowledge. And then there was her budding sense of justice. A few days hence, Maomao would uncover a mysterious and terrible truth concerning the deaths of several infants in the rear palace. Some said it was a curse laid upon any concubine who dared to produce an heir, but Maomao refused to regard the matter as anything supernatural. Chapter 2. The Two Consorts. So it's true? It is. She says she saw the doctor go into their rooms with her own eyes. Maomao sipped her soup and listened. Hundreds of serving girls were having their breakfast in the vast dining room. The meal consisted of soup and a porridge of mixed grains. She was listening to 2 women diagonally across from her as they traded gossip. The women took pains to look chagrined about the story, but it was an unseemly curiosity that lit their eyes. "He visited both Lady Gyokyo and Lady Liwa. Gracious, both of them? But they're only 6 months and 3 months, aren't they? That's right. Maybe it really is a curse." The names were those of the emperor's 2 favorite consorts. 6 months and 3 months were the ages of the lady's children. Rumors were rife in the palace. Some of them sprang from contempt from His Majesty's companions and the airs they bore him, but others had more the savor of simple ghost stories, the sort of tales told during the summer doldrums to beat the heat by chilling the blood. It must be. Otherwise, why would 3 separate children have died? All of the offspring in question had been born to consorts. That is to say, they could in principle have been heirs to the throne. One of the poor victims had been born to His Majesty before his ascension, while he still lived in the Eastern Palace, and 2 more since he had assumed the throne, but all 3 had passed away in infancy. Mortality was common among infants, of course, but that 3 of the emperor's own progeny should die so young was strange. Only 2 children, those of the consorts Gyokyo and Liwa, still survived. Poisonings, perhaps? Maomao mused, sipping her porridge, but she concluded it couldn't be. After all, 2 of the 3 dead children had been girls, and in a land where only men could inherit the throne, what reason was there to murder princesses? The women across from Maomao were so busy talking about curses and hexes that they had stopped eating entirely. But there's no such thing as curses, Maomao thought. It was stupid. That was the only word for it. How could you destroy an entire clan with 1 curse? Such questions bordered on the heretical, but Maomao's expertise, she felt, constituted proof of this pronouncement. Could it have been some kind of sickness? Something bloodborne, maybe. How exactly did they die? And that was when the detached, quiet maid began talking to her chatty dining companions. It would not be long before Maomao regretted succumbing to her curiosity. I don't know the whole story, but I heard they always sit away. Apparently inspired by Maomao's show of interest, Zhao Lan, the talkative maid, thereafter regularly brought her the latest rumors. The doctor's been to see Lady Liwa more often than Lady Gyokyo, so I guess Lady Liwa must be worse. She wiped at a window frame with a rag as she spoke. Lady Liwa herself? Yes, it's mother and child both. Maomao supposed the doctor paid closer attention to the Lady Liwa not necessarily because she was more sick, but because her child was a little prince. Consort Gyokyo had borne a princess. The imperial affection fell more upon Gyokyo, but when one child was a boy and the other a girl, which one should receive preferential treatment was clear. Like I said, I don't know everything, but I heard she has headaches and stomach aches and even some nausea. Satisfied that she had divulged all her newest gleanings, Zhao Lan busied herself with another task. By way of thanks, Maomao gave her some tea flavored with licorice. She made it with some herbs that grew in a corner of the central garden. It smelled strongly medicinal, but it was in fact quite sweet. Zhao Lan was thrilled. Serving girls had all too few opportunities to enjoy sweet things. Headache, stomachache, and nausea. Maomao had some ideas as to what illnesses these might portend, but she couldn't be sure, and her father had never tired of admonishing her not to do her thinking based on assumptions. Maybe I'll just pay her a little visit. Maomao was determined to finish her work as quickly as possible. The rear palace was in fact a vast place, housing more than 2,000 women and 500 eunuchs on the premises. Lowly workers like Maomao slept 10 to a room, but the lower-ranked consorts had their own chambers, mid-ranking ones had whole buildings to themselves, and the highest-ranking consorts virtually had their own palaces, sprawling complexes including dining halls and gardens, large enough to dwarf a small town. Thus, Maomao rarely left the eastern quarter where she lived. There was no need. She had neither the time nor the means to leave unless she was sent on some errand. Well, if I don't have an errand, I'll just have to make one. Maomao spoke to a woman holding a basket. This basket contained fine silk that would have to be washed over in the laundry area in the western quarter. No one seemed to know whether there was something different about the water there, or perhaps about the people who did the washing, but apparently the silk would soon be ruined if handled here in the eastern quarter. Maomao understood that silk degraded more or less depending on whether it was dried out in the sun or kept in the shade, but she felt no particular need to tell anybody that. I'm just dying to get a look at that gorgeous eunuch they say lives in the central area, Maomao said, invoking one of the other rumors Zhao Lan had mentioned in passing, and the woman gladly gave her the basket. Chances for anything resembling romance were few and far between in this place, so that even the eunuchs, men who were not really men, soon became something to swoon over. Stories were even told from time to time of women who became the wives of eunuchs after they left palace service. Presumably, this was all healthier than the women lusting after each other instead, but it still puzzled Maomao. Wonder if I'll end up like everyone else one day, she thought to herself. She crossed her arms and grunted. Romantic matters held scant interest for her. She delivered the basket of laundry as quickly as she could, and then a red lacquered building of the central area came into view. Carvings were everywhere, every pillar like a work of art unto itself. Each detail had been attended to, so that the whole was far more refined than anything on the fringes of the eastern quarter. At present, the largest quarters in the rear palace were occupied by Consort Liwa, the mother of the prince. The emperor was without an empress proper, which made Liwa, the only one of his women with a son, the most powerful person here. The scene Maomao discovered looked as if it could have come from the city itself. One woman fulminated, one hung her head in gloom, while others fussed and fretted, and a man tried to make peace among them all. It's hardly different from a brothel, Maomao thought, a cold observation made possible by her status as a third party, if not a gawker. The upset woman was the most powerful person in the rear palace, the one hanging her head the next most powerful, and the fussy women were attendants. The man, no doubt a man no longer at this point, interceding was the doctor. So much, Maomao gathered from the whispering she heard and the general state of things around her. That first woman would have to be Consort Liwa, mother of the imperial prince, and the second woman would be Consort Gyokyo, blessed, though not quite so blessed as Liwa, with a daughter. As for the eunuch doctor, Maomao knew nothing about him, but she had heard that in this whole great palace there was only one person who could truly be called a practitioner of medicine. This is your doing. Just because you had a girl, you got it into your head to curse my prince to death. A beautiful face, distorted by anger, is a frightful thing. Eyes as furious as a demon's, set in a face as pale as a ghost's, were turned upon the beautiful Gyokyo, who held a hand to her cheek. There was a red mark under her fingers. She had, Maomao surmised, been slapped with an open hand. That isn't true, and you know it. My Zhaoling is suffering just as much as your son. The second woman had red hair and eyes the color of jade, and she answered the charges calmly, referring to the young Princess Lingli by an affectionate nickname. Consort Gyokyo's look suggested no small amount of Western blood in her veins. Now she raised her head and glared at the doctor. And that is why I request that you not neglect to attend to my daughter as well. It seemed the doctor himself was the reason intercession had been needed between the two women. He had been spending all his time looking in here at the young prince, and Gyokyo was appealing in her daughter's behalf. One sympathized with her, but this was the rear palace, and male children were more prized than female ones. The doctor, for his part, looked caught between trying to make an excuse and total speechlessness. What a knave, that Sawbones, Maomao thought. To fail to notice with the two consorts right in front of him. How could he not have figured it out already anyway? The dead infants, the headaches, the stomach pains, the nausea, to say nothing of Consort Liwa's ghostly pallor and frail appearance. Muttering to herself, Maomao put the raucous scene behind her. I need something to write on, she thought. She was so busy thinking it, in fact, that she didn't even notice the person passing by.